What is up, everybody? Another day, another month has gone by since the last time we got together. I am the infamous Joe Garcia, coming to you live today with the third installment of Ask Joe Anything. I've got a great show planned for us today, an extremely special guest, a friend of many years of mine. We're going to get into all of that. But I do want to make sure first that if you didn't get a chance to check out the last episode of Ask Joe Anything with Mike Bycat from CyberArk talking about everything JIT and secure cloud access, you can view it live on demand on YouTube by going to youtube.com/infamous Joe G and checking that out. We are still answering questions in the comments. So if you watch the video, nothing relevant to you was answered in the Q&A portion, and you have your own question, feel free to drop it there, and we'll be more than happy to answer it in those comments. So today was a big day at CyberArk. We announced that we are officially releasing the CyberArk Secure Browser. So about 2 episodes ago in January, I didn't ask Joe anything on identity, security, and flows with Jared Brodsky. And during that, Jared actually helped showcase a little bit about the CyberArk Secure Browser. And so the CyberArk Secure Browser is pretty new. There's a video here that kind of goes over what it entails. It's about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I'm going to mute it. It's about 2 minutes and 15 seconds, but it's going to go through very high level everything that the CyberArk Secure Browser can bring for you, the problems that it addresses in current browsers today, and how it implements different security strategies at the browser level to protect things like cookies and other aspects of the browser that can be vulnerable to common attacks. So as I mentioned, this is out here on cyberark.com. You can check it out. You can sign up to watch a demo, read the ebook if that's your thing. I find that this video, plus the episode with Jared Brodsky, where he does a live demo of CyberArk Secure Browser, you can see what it looks like, see how to interact with it. You can also see how it integrates with your vault, right? So that it can start to bring in different credentials that have been onboarded into your vault by way of just being a browser that integrates with it. So it's a very cool concept. It's being released officially today. So go ahead and check it out on cyberark.com. Come and watch the live demo out here on YouTube. With all of that said, I do want to introduce my guest for today. He is the senior manager for the newly developed CXO Security Advisory Group here at CyberArk. I have been working with him for about 5 years now. I think we really joined forces back in 2019. He is one of the authors who penned the great Blueprint for Identity Security Success, and now he is bringing all of that great program and strategy development to all of the customers that are out there. James Creamer, welcome, dude. It's good to finally have you on the show. I thought actually I had you before and I was bringing you back for an encore, but that wasn't even the case. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Lots of cool stuff to talk about. Not so much technical like Jared and Mike, but I think all important nonetheless, right? You need good process and people and strategy to implement good tools. So yeah, really excited to be on, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually let's kind of talk about. I want to kind of talk about the roots of James Creamer, right? Like, we know where you are today. You're really driving strategy. You're driving the program development across the entire identity security platform that CyberArk provides. But how the heck did you even get to a position like that? Tell me about before CyberArk, like what you did, and then kind of what brought you to the idea of wanting to join CyberArk.
Yep. Yeah, happy to talk a little bit about my background and how I got here. So I've been in sort of tech more or less my whole life. Was a kid growing up whose dad was a software developer, and so like my hobbies were tinkering with computers since I was a kid, right? Mostly breaking them. And then, as you progress through college and start going into your professional career, tech had always been a part of that as well. And I'd also joined the Marine Corps while I was in college, and so I was sort of running these like two parallel paths in my life. And when I got out, I decided to go get my master's in security and resilience studies with a concentration in cybersecurity policy. And after that, that led me to my first role as a consultant at a like small boutique cybersecurity company where the main area that I operated in was privileged access management. And so I did that, worked with them for a couple of years, helping to develop strategy and implementation for our sort of joint customers at the time. And then after a couple of years of doing that, I jumped over to the mothership, so to speak, and I came to CyberArk, and I've worked in a bunch of different roles at CyberArk since then. You alluded to that you and I had worked together a lot in the past. I used to be a strategic SE. I've moved into a couple of different strategy related roles. And sort of how I got into the strategy side of it is that, a lot of the large organizations that I was helping do implementations for, wasn't so much like, how do I actually implement CyberArk, the security control or the service, and get it up and running? It was like, hey, how do we figure out what it is that we actually use this for to make the biggest dent? How do we apply these controls to the right places to mitigate risk? How do we then sort of report on what it is that we're doing to the different stakeholders in the organization? And that's something it's sort of always been in my wheelhouse. I like to say that the role that I'm in is a bit of like a Rosetta Stone kind of position, where you have to take really technical things and translate them or transcribe them into, security leader, business leader speak. And I think all of that comes together nicely when you talk about developing strategy and how you operationalize programs. And it's a lot of like seeing the bigger picture, but then also being able to translate that to the technical, the tactical, because every technical or tactical thing anybody ever does serves some strategic purpose. And it's a little bit of storytelling, right? That's why I really like to describe my job as being a storyteller. And so that was super long-winded. Hopefully that navigated us along the journey, but that's sort of where I am today. And a lot of what I do.
Yeah, that's great. That's a lot of great background and information. I learned stuff that I didn't know about, you prior to CyberArk. We actually got together towards the end of 2018 when I was already leading the Conjure effort internally, trying to get everyone enabled with Conjure, and just really, I was burned out, man. I'm going to be honest. Like, I was at my wit's end with, trying to take this new technology, this new concept to everyone, and try and, speak in a language that makes sense to everyone to understand, while I'm still trying to learn it myself. And I was like, you know what? I think that my focus is probably better served trying to, introduce this into larger enterprises, right? And that's kind of when I became a member of your team, essentially, right? There was the strategic accounts team.
It wasn't my team, but yes.
Well, so it was Kevin's team, right, at the time. But you and also Sean May, who I believe is one of our architects now. Is that correct? Is he?
He's a technical program manager within customer.
Okay.
So it's like a lot of still architecture style stuff, but
everybody moved forward into the strategy game, because that strategic accounts team actually was moved from being focused on just strategic accounts, the very large, like Fortune 100, for lack of a better term, right, enterprises, to, okay, we now want to do this across the entire organization. So we need a way of making this fit for more than just who you've been dealing with. Make it fit with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really matters, and it's really important, because not just like companies of all sizes need good practical guidance to move the needle to operate right and operationalize the cybersecurity services that they're investing in order to actually see a return, or I don't want to say return on their investment, because cybersecurity is a cost center, right? It's not a profit generator for any company,
right?
but it does, mitigate risk in a meaningful way, and being able to help our customers along the way to do that
Yeah.
most effectively, and tell the story that they need to tell their security leaders as well, and those security leaders to the board of directors, right, at their companies,
Yeah.
is all really important stuff, because you could do a lot of great things, and if you don't know how to tell the story about the things that you're doing, no one's going to think you did anything. So,
when I was a part of that team, and you and Sean, for the most part, along with Kevin, were developing the blueprint for identity security success, the first iteration of that blueprint. I was kind of along for the ride. I wouldn't say that I contributed as much as you guys did. Automation was still a newer concept, right? There weren't many customers really dipping their toes in it yet. I feel like it's matured since then, right? Since it was initially introduced, and there's a lot of great strategies and blueprint for that, which I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit. So I'm probably jumping the gun a bit, but I just really think that there were so many amazing advanced strategies and concepts that were created as additional collateral to blueprint that I feel like never really got a chance to see the light of day, or maybe they still do exist but aren't really known as much. It's just there's a lot of information that I think that a lot of people are not necessarily privy to. That is, I mean, it's absolutely amazing that I can have a conversation today with a customer about how they can introduce application, just application lifecycle management in general, right, along with our product. And I can go to Blueprint, and there is an application inventory intake form. There is like a whole process maturity model for how to go from zero to hero in this. Like, there's a lot of information there that I could easily just use for my organization without really needing to make any changes to it if I wanted to. So all of that is basically just giving you praise and saying that I absolutely think that they picked the best person for the position that you're in today. I'm really excited for this program and strategy conversation that we're about to get into. But before we do that, I want to kind of take a step back and let's kind of take a look at some of the events that are going on. What do you think? And we'll kind of talk about those events with everyone.
Let's do it. Yeah, it's event season coming up, right? It's about to
It
get
is.
fast and furious with the stuff that's happening. So
it is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share out my screen. But fortunately, we're already getting questions from some people on YouTube that we'll be able to ask going into the second hour. So for everyone out there listening, if you do have any questions pertaining to program development, pertaining to best practices or strategy with any of the products in identity security platform, or just strategy in general with how to approach certain situations as it pertains to compliance and needs like that, feel free to put them in the live chat. We'll be addressing those in the second hour. So you've got time to think about it. And we've got a lot more to touch on. But first, James, I want to talk to you a little bit about Impact coming up. I've been touching on this first thing in the past, Ask Joe Anythings. We're getting ready for it. The last one that I did, we were at the deadline for call for papers. So that is passed. We're actually days away from a high-level agenda being included here on the website, followed by then the acceptance of the call for papers, the announcements going out, and then the full agenda being released with all of the details. So I am wondering, James Creamer, did you submit a call for paper topic?
Yeah, there are a couple of topics that I submitted. Not entirely sure of everything that's been accepted yet. I do know one of the things that I submitted was accepted. So I'll be there. I'll be speaking at least in one session, maybe more sessions. And so I'm super excited about that, but I'm not going to dig in too much about what yet.
That's okay. That's okay. You've got some talks. I think we can guess what the talks are centered around, right? I think that's
maybe.
a fair.
We'll find out.
Okay. how about training? Usually that Monday, so the 20th in this case, is a day full of training. Is there any training that you've been tapped to do from a programmer strategy
No,
perspective?
no, not that I'm aware of, unless someone's been planning it and they haven't told me yet.
That
So
could be the case.
yeah, I don't think so. I don't think I'm getting tapped for anything on Monday. So, but I'm sure I'll
Cool.
be involved in a lot of customer discussions while we're down there for those who are coming and scheduling meetings with their account teams and stuff. So
Cool. Awesome. So I did submit something. I do not want to talk about it yet because I don't want to jinx it. I don't even remember if I talked about it on the last Ask Joe Anything. I am getting positive feedback internally, so I submitted it outside of the official channels because it kind of breaks the format of a traditional breakout session. That's about all I'm going to say about it. But it is an extremely unique proposal. I am hoping that it is accepted. It's been going through the steering committee. It's been getting positive feedback, but I still haven't gotten that green light yet. So still holding on to hope, but definitely don't want to jinx it, because if we do get to do this, it is going to be so much fun. And I am extremely excited that I've been able to include you, James. So hopefully, we'll be able to be on stage at Impact at some point.
yeah, that'll be cool. Fingers crossed.
Speaking of that, we were on stage at Impact once before, come to think of it. I was sifting through some old presentations to give to a colleague, and I came across, oh, look at that. What the heck is that?
The
Is that
thumbs up from some? I don't know. Oh, did you put your thumb up and then it noticed that you had a thumb up?
Oh my goodness. What is
Oh, it's
what is
probably
doing
your
that?
camera's probably set
Is
to
that
do
my
some
camera?
cool
I've
things.
never seen this before.
Ladies
Okay.
and gentlemen, blowing Joe's mind live.
I've not seen that before. That's interesting. But no, so in 2019, Impact is when we were on stage together. And the talk was, do you remember the name of the talk?
I know it was security at inception. It's a
Yes, it
concept I
was.
still talk about quite often, and we'll probably talk about today too. So
Awesome. I mean, it is still relevant today. And I still, go back to that. Even so, it's crazy how it's relevant today, honestly, because it seemed when we did our talk initially, one of the ways of dealing with security at inception, we utilized Ansible to be able to automate a lot of things for the conversation now today, because everything is very cloud native and built for the cloud. The conversation has changed, and it's becoming a question of how can we have Terraform build cloud accounts, right, in AWS and things like that, and provision all of these resources, and then introduce those into CyberArk's identity security platform at inception using Terraform. So the same concept applies. It's just the technology and the platforms and the places have changed, which, I mean, it's amazing that these ideas can persist for, several years without really going out of date.
it's so funny. We'll talk about a couple different topics that are very similar to that, where there are obviously always new things happening, right? New attack methods, like new, very like specific techniques to things. On the process side, like the way we execute process changes over time, but like the underlying like thoughts around them and like the things have not really changed at all in the last 5 or 10 years. You're just sort of applying these same concepts to new things.
Yeah.
And I think like the greatest hits are always the greatest hits for a reason, right?
Yep.
Because they just like they shred when you listen to it, and the same thing
Yep.
applies to a lot of this stuff too. So
yeah, man. Hey, you know what? I'll compare CyberArk to Metallica, any day of the week, right? Metallica's old,
Metallica, but that's
but
cool.
Metallica's old, but like their new albums are still kick ass, right? So, why not? I'm not going to ever venture away from Metallica and say I don't like Metallica. Like they've always got some great hits. So, all right. So moving on, there is in a couple days. Oh, shoot, tomorrow. It's the 27th. This is on the 28th. Yeah, tomorrow you're on it again, James. You've got the identity security clinic. So we talked about this in the last Ask Joe Anything with Mike Bycat and kind of covered it a little bit, but I didn't know that you were the one who was running this until pre-show, our little pre-show talk. So, tell me a little bit about this. I see some of the green check marks here and stuff that people will be able to drive through, but what do you have planned for them? Can we get any little sneak peeks?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff related to what is really like a lot of fundamentals of identity security. So we'll probably touch on some similar concepts today, but not a lot, not like completely everything similar. And it's in the context of like a very particular scenario, right? We're trying to break down this scenario where an organization has been breached, and as a result, they've got a bunch of follow-on actions they need to perform, but like they don't really have a lot of guidance on like how to go about addressing a lot of the like findings that have been discovered. And so we're basically like talking through this scenario and framing it to figure out like how do we discover those gaps, how do we understand, how do we break down the problem, how do we put the right controls in place, and then how do we like put more proactive things in place to stop that from happening again. So like because it is sort of strategy and execution related, there'll be a lot of similar concepts and ideas and things, but I think the story and the framing of it's going to be very, very different tomorrow versus what you might see and hear out of me today.
Cool. Awesome. Well, everybody would need to sign up for this. I got this. I'll share with everyone in a minute how I got to this and how I got to the rest that we're about to talk about here, because we also have coming up the day before my birthday, April 3rd, in Washington, D.C., if you're up in the Northeast United States area, there is our first Impact World Tour of the year. I think it's our first. Is it, James? Do you know?
I also think I think we might have done one in
like Canada,
Latin America.
Right?
No, there might have been a couple of things going on. I just don't recall exactly what part of the year.
Okay. Oh, look, we've got an agenda for it. So there's a lot of, BT's going to be there. Amy's going to be there.
BT's going to be there.
BT's a lot of fun. Matt Cohen is going to be there. Awesome. Our CEO live and in person.
I'm also going to be there.
Maroon. Okay. We've got Mike Bycat, who was on the last Ask Joe Anything. Dylan's going to be there. Noam Liren, who he used to be our boss back in the day. Remember that? Talking about CyberArk's blueprint for identity security success. Go figure.
But not me.
Jeremy's going to be speaking as well. Oh, I forgot. I totally skipped you, dude. Oh, you're with BT. Nice. Yeah. That'll be a fun talk. This is the one to watch right here. That's it.
A lot of it will be good. So I'm excited.
No, everything. Everybody here is great. Looks like Joe is going to be, traveling by car to the event because he's already there. He's awesome to listen to. He's been on the show a couple times in the past. Jared, we had back in January. Looks like he's going to be doing a talk on securing workforce identities. So a lot of stuff, a lot of awesome stuff happening in DC on April 3rd. That's next Wednesday, I believe, right? Yeah, my birthday is Thursday. Yep. I won't be here. I'll be taking off 2 days. So
good for you.
Yes, I am looking forward to it. I did that before I knew that we were getting this Friday off for a holiday. I had no clue it was a holiday until like a couple days ago.
I didn't even realize it was a holiday until you just said it. So I have to probably reschedule whatever I have on the calendar for Friday.
Yeah, it's a holiday for everyone at CyberArk. So Impact World Tour DC. More to come. There are a lot more of these that you can definitely check out and plan for in advance through our events page. And then finally, there's a securing all identities all of the time. This is just the first session of a multi-session situation here, but that session is going to be on April 16th. So this will be occurring before the next Ask Joe Anything, 2 p.m., 11 a.m. Globally. And so it's going to be like a fireside chat with our red team and stuff. So sometimes it's pretty cool to check this out and see what the newest attacks are going on out there. And then also how you can remediate them or, proactively prevent them utilizing CyberArk products and controls and things like that. So just wanted to touch on those couple of events. If you are wondering how I found those events yourself, I went out to cyberark.com. Clicked up at the top at the events link, and then you have all of the events here that you can peruse and get to at your pleasure. And then you'll get this little ding and pop up like I always get to talk to somebody who's not real. Outside of that, I think that covers most of the events coming up here in the near future. I don't have any events happening myself outside of what was announced. So more to come on that. I'm sure things will start to get better as the summer goes on, and I'll have more things to share with everyone. So Yeah, that. As far as what we've got going on today, we've got about 30 minutes left before I kind of want to turn the controls over to our live chat and start to get our questions in so that we can start answering them. But I want to give you the opportunity now to, talk about any awesome projects that you got going on. I've been seeing lately that there have been a lot of great articles being posted to the Success blog in the technical community that I've been sending out to customers as a way. Whoops, I hit my keyboard, as a way to kind of get them started going down the road, the right road, actually, for non-human secrets and dealing with that sort of side of the fence. Now, I will admit my focus is mainly on the non-human side, so I'm not very up to date on the human side of things. So I'm hoping to really get to learn something from you today, and I'll have a ton of questions for you. But I kind of want to see where you wanted to start off with. What do you want to chat about today?
Yeah, so I actually think I'll probably save the CyberArk success blog for a little bit later,
Okay.
because it'll get like really into the weeds on some like oddly specific scenarios, right? But let me pull up this presentation and I'll kind of just talk through some concepts real high level, and I got a ton that I could talk about, so I'm probably going to skim through a lot of it.
Okay.
But let me find the right presenter button, share screen. Let me find the right window to share. Cool. And it might be a little ugly because I got this on an ultra wide, so we're just gonna have to deal with it.
It's not so bad.
That's okay. Yeah. So, like I said, a lot of my role is in being doing strategic security advisory to cybersecurity leaders, right? Whether they be C-level, part of the extended security leadership team, right? Program developers, program managers, the folks who have influence in setting the direction and strategy for what identity security looks like across organizations, right? So that's like the main target audience that I work with. But a lot of those functions, right, are then engaging with, collaborating with, communicating with a variety of different folks who work for them to practically execute these strategies, right? Or figure out whatever the next steps are going to be. So I have a bunch of stuff that I can talk about today. Certainly not going to have time to talk about all of it.
Yeah.
What I'll probably focus on is bullet number one. We'll talk a little bit about enterprise information security programs, identity security, and some program development concepts. I'll probably bounce around a little bit to, understanding risk access and privilege controls and some roadmap development stuff. And then I'll probably flip over to the success blog and talk about, a couple different examples of some of these different assets and things that we have that support these different topics, right? Because we're looking at here on this sort of agenda in this deck is like a lot of the stuff that goes into thinking about how do you build an enterprise, identity security program, right?
Right.
There's a lot that goes into it. So there's obviously a lot that you could potentially talk about. But let's talk about some of the first stuff. I don't know if Jared or Mike have shown this slide before, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did. I always like talking about or starting off talking about like what is driving a lot of the changes within the identity security programs that our customers are implementing. And there's really three major trends that we see. There's this sort of proliferation of new identities. And when we say new identities, it could be both truly new things that did not exist previously, or it's sort of like the new concept of something, a role changing, right, to now be sort of considered privileged. And so there's a lot more identities that require different levels of privilege access today than there was, I don't know, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. There are new environments, right? You've got lots of new environments that exist within the cloud. You have the cloud native service providers themselves, the elastic cloud workloads that exist in the cloud, lots of new SaaS applications that exist, some sort of mundane and workforce oriented, and some extremely high risk, cybersecurity oriented. And then you've also got a lot of new attack methods, both both a combination of attacks on identity infrastructure and sort of some complex attacks that allow organizations to compromise, the identity providers at their top level, or bypass MFA, or even leveraging new attack sort of techniques, or like tools to build new techniques, like malicious powered AI, right? Using AI as a malicious attacker to develop new scripts and tools, to create a whole new wave of polymorphic malware that leverages AI to adapt and change. And so there's a lot that's happening in the space that's driving a lot of like change within identity security strategy. And I think that's just an important place to start to talk about framing, right? Because these are a lot of things that you're starting to see now percolate through different identity security strategy. So before I get more specific into identity security, I think it's really important for us to take a step back and just understand, where does it even fit within the realm of like traditional enterprise information security program management? So, that top bar, right, is like all things, cybersecurity or information security at an organization. And there's lots of different pillars that exist within that. You've got sort of traditional identity access management, of course, privilege access management. But then there's all these other pillars. And this list isn't like exhaustive, by the way. This is just like what a lot of organizations have different pillars for. They could have many more than this. Threat detection and response programs, vulnerability management programs, endpoint security programs, DLP, network security, GRC, AppSec, BCDR, lots of different stuff, right? Just rattle off a bunch of acronyms in like 5 seconds, right? And I know that there are more. But the point that I want to make about that is, when we think about identity security, there's so much of that is like spread across all of these different programs that we don't necessarily think about, right?
Right.
So, if I take identity security and I try to apply it to these different pillars, right? Of course, it's going to fit in your traditional IAM with identity governance and security first access management, controlling and governing access to enterprise resources, and delivering that foundational access that the workforce and everybody else at the company needs to access things, right? That's sort of traditional. But then you have everything that would fall under some sort of classification of intelligent privilege control, right? PAM controls, applying privilege controls to high risk and sensitive enterprise resources, both traditional infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, SaaS applications, endpoint security, application security. All of that spans intelligent privilege control. Your threat detection and response programs, right? With identity threat detection and response, proactively and reactively detecting and responding to threats. And then governance risk compliance, right? It's all about the auditing and reporting on the risk mitigation and progress and compliance to support this other pillar within the business. And it could be more exhaustive than this, but this is really like the main area, like the sort of next order out, if you will, that you might think of things falling not solely within just, IAM or PAM, right? There's a lot of other places where identity security has a major role in enterprise-wide cybersecurity.
Let's talk about this slide for a second, because I think that it visualizes a problem that exists, that I've been identifying a lot more recently myself. Now, you have to understand, right? I'm not your traditional CyberArk employee where I am dealing with traditional PAM scenarios or endpoint security or something like that. Who I'm dealing with is a collaboration of roles, right? I have a cloud admin, I have a developer, I have the security team, and typically there is a rift between the security team and the developers as to who should own secrets management, application secrets. So really focusing on that application security side of things. And I think that if we were just to focus on that singular pillar of application security, it could be it's irrelevant who owns it, right? Like, as long as you have at heart application security, it could be a developer doing it. It could be a security IAM person, whatever. But I think that I know that the one thing that everyone fails to realize is what comes along with any of these pillars, whether it's identity access management, PAM, endpoint, application security. Everybody always forgets about GRC. And who's going to own that if the developers own all of the secrets management? Are the developers going to take time out of their lives to answer all of the audit findings on their secrets and to go and get all of the audit activity to report on these audit findings? Like, then what happens to all of their decreased project timelines because they need to release more, because they need to make money for the company, but now they're having to sit here and do all of this audit work because they decided they wanted to own secrets management? And so it's really having a conversation about the things that are outside of the purview of the laser focus that we have in trying to solve this one issue. And I feel like this is the slide that everyone should see to get a true understanding of everything that goes into an identity security program. It's not just focusing on getting secrets out of something, rotating those secrets. There's a lot more to the story than that.
Yeah, it's also helpful in painting the picture that like security truly is a team game, because there's so many different facets of different parts of cybersecurity programs that apply. Like if I go back to this slide, I'm sure I could go pick any one of these random things that isn't like IAM and PAM and find a way that it connects back to something else as well, right? And so, the big part about this is like understanding the interconnectedness of these different program pillars to not sort of be operating in a complete silo, in that, true strategies for success require collaboration amongst different program management groups, right?
Right.
In defining the right roles and responsibilities, and collaboration and handoffs and handshakes and all that stuff as you're building out what your operating model is essentially going to look like for these different facets of identity security.
Yeah.
So
That was when I would go on site, and go into these conference rooms back when we were doing that, right? Pre-pandemic type, stuff. And I'd be in these huge conference rooms with these companies, and I'd be surrounded at the conference table with all of the customers, best and brightest. The first question I would always ask is, who here is with governance, risk, and compliance? And everybody'd look around and be like, well, nobody's here. I'm like, well, how are we going to have a conversation about, identity security without having someone who has compliance in mind to help you understand what you can actually do or not, right? Like, we're already starting off on the wrong foot.
I mean, it's not like malicious by any means, right? It's just like, organizations are like, a lot of this is still new to a lot of organizations to the extent of which identity security controls can be applied. And so you end up with a little bit of these growing pains where you haven't seen the widest view of all these different folks that you probably need to collaborate with, like early on in the cycle, right? And so that's a big reason why I try to talk about these things, is because I want organizations to be informed about how they should be proactively collaborating with these different peer organizations to make sure that like the business as a whole can be protected, not just like me focused on my little silo view.
Right.
Because I'll fast forward to one slide, then I'll jump back to here in a second. Is because we often forget that like while yes, everyone has an area of focus, like we have to see the bigger picture of all of the enterprise resources collectively and all of the identities and personas that need to be protected, because of how access is so federated and interconnected, and how, if all you ever did was like, say, let me take my little laser pointer here. If all you ever did was focus on, say, IT's access to, VMs and elastic resources and traditional infrastructure, right? But you didn't look at the developers' access to those same resources, or the machines access to the same resources. You can't say that like, oh, we've protected IT's access to this thing right here, because there's an unsecure backdoor around developers, or an unsecure backdoor around machines that we have not protected, right? And so it's really thinking about how all of those things work together in that sort of interconnected way that I think sets, organizations who are looking at it this way, right? Like proactively looking at it like this, are doing a much better job at identifying where some of these gaps might exist downstream and getting in front of them versus having to react to them.
Cool. So, yeah, no, that makes sense.
All right, I'm going to shift this forward real quick before I start bouncing around to some other topics. Sure. This is a concept that I like to talk about as like a unified program development. It's really looking at a lot of these different, frameworks and models and things that are used to build a like singular approach to what your program is going to look like. And this is certainly not exhaustive, but this is from all the discussions that I have, some of the most common things that end up coming up in conversation that we want to think about proactively and how they get sort of stitched together. So what I'll do is I'll take us left to right and explain what each of these things are, how it influences sort of how we think about program development, and how it maybe flows into the next thing downstream, because a lot of this is going to end up working together. So on the far left-hand side, we have what I call attack chain, cyber threat intelligence, insights, and TTPs. This is all about the different frameworks, like attack frameworks that are out there that describe how do bad people do bad things within your organization, right? What are the techniques? What are the methods? What are the processes? What are the things that they exploit to attack you? And essentially, by starting off with that on the far left-hand side, you're digesting what is happening in the real world and most relevant to attacks today. And that's really, like, I think, an important place to start framing your perspective and view, because it's telling you what's actually happening out in the wild, right? And what are the things that are like practically going to help protect you from attacks? Whereas cybersecurity frameworks and regulatory standards, we move into the next sort of two cells on the right-hand side, are all about describing to you what it is that you should be doing or you have to do in order to be compliant. So cybersecurity frameworks are nothing more than very serious sets of recommendations that you should be following, right? They say, if you follow these things, in theory, you should be more protected, right? But they often don't give you a strong sense of prioritization or a strong sense of alignment to the things that are happening in the real world. So by focusing on the attack chain, CTI insights, and TTPs first, you're going into viewing what the cybersecurity frameworks like NIST 800-171 or the CIS V8 critical security controls are telling you, with a view of reality, essentially, right? Which
Are
I think
those are those are those cybersecurity frameworks like NIST and CIS? Are those requirements in certain industries, or are those more
so
voluntary, like how to basically
yeah.
secure yourself?
So let me actually flip to a different slide, because that's a great question. I've got something a little bit later. So
Okay,
when we talk about cybersecurity frameworks, in some cases, they are in fact also considered a regulatory compliance standard,
gotcha.
right? And not in all cases. So like NIST 800-171 and ISO ISC 27001 are, I think, two really good examples of this, where they are essentially considered like the gold standard in America and in Europe for what a cybersecurity framework should be, for certain non-regulated areas, right? And they'll say, okay, we're a big NIST shop. NIST is this standard for the federal government, right? In classified information, we're going to follow these practices because we know that they're good, right? Versus if you're actually a member of the federal government as an organization, you have to do it because it is a requirement. So, and the same with ISO ISC in certain cases in Europe as well. So
Right.
in some cases, the answer is yes, it's both,
Mhm.
or it could be considered both. And in some cases, it's not. So like a lot of regulatory standards like SOX and CMMC and even like cyber insurance, which really isn't a regulatory standard, but kind of gets treated like one,
Right.
they're often derivatives of cybersecurity frameworks. So these regulatory bodies say, okay, we're going to look at what the cybersecurity frameworks say are the recommendations you should be doing. Let's just mandate that you do some or all of those things, right? So a really good example of that is CMMC 2.0, which is something that's relevant for federal defense contractors. It is, in fact, just NIST 800-171 broken down into like phase 1 and phase 2, right? It's like
Nice.
100% identical. So it, in fact, is truly a derivative of the same exact thing. So
Cool.
yeah. But these things, all they're doing is just telling you, either what do we consider things you should be focusing on, or in the case of regulatory standards, what do you have to do in order to be compliant,
Right.
and either not get fined or not suffer some sort of penalty, right? Because you operate in some sort of either governmental regulatory body or industry regulatory body, or in the case of cyber insurance, like, you want to have cyber insurance, show us that you're doing these things, and that way we'll give you either a
Right.
discount on your premium or we'll cover you at all, because some cases they won't.
And
Um,
s- and so the regulatory standards you have to follow to a T, if that is, like SOX, for example, right? We all are familiar with that. that what that states from a regulatory standards perspective is how it needs to be implemented, which is a little bit different from CyberArk's blueprint, where
Yeah.
it's a
So let me.
it's a framework, but yeah, I'll let you kind of explain it.
Yeah. So the big problem with a lot of cybersecurity frameworks and regulatory standards is that they they mostly tell you that you should do these things or you have to do these things, but then they're not always particularly prioritized. In some cases, they say you should focus on this type of control first, but they don't tell you to what things should you be applying this to, like what enterprise resources, what enterprise identities should you be applying these types of controls and mechanisms to. They just say you need to do it. And
Yeah.
when you think about the reality of organizations, they don't have infinite money or energy or time or effort to spend. And so in order to make the biggest impact, get the best risk reduction bang for your effort, so to speak, you want to lean on experience that tells you like what does that. And that's really where the
Mhm.
CyberArk blueprint comes into play. So the blueprint tries to do is say, look, we know that there are certain types of controls that need to be implemented. We know that you need to implement secure standing privilege controls like vaulting and rotation and isolation. We know we need to implement zero standing privilege controls, just in time, role-based, federated, least privileged access, right, to say cloud service providers or, elastic infrastructure or something, right? Like we know that there's very specific things we need to do that get applied to very specific types of resources because you don't
Mhm.
solve the same problem or you don't solve the problem for the different types of enterprise resources the same way. Like you're not going to use a hammer, to like make a hole in your wall if you're trying to like, put a
Mm,
window in, right? You're going to
my
use a
son begs
saw.
to differ. If I go
Yeah.
into his room right now,
Well,
it's actually an arrow that he whittled the other day because it's spring break and there's not much going on, and then he decides to stab it right into his wall. But
in any case,
regardless,
it's about like using the right tool for the job, right?
right,
But it's also about knowing what are the types of enterprise resources and privileged access patterns that exist. They're going to get me that best bang for my buck. And so that's where the blueprint also comes into play to say, okay, we know you need to do all of this stuff. You
right,
can't do everything all at the same time. So how do we help you prioritize where you should focus your effort to get the
yep,
best impact you can as quickly as possible? And that's how it sort of aligns, because that's really where the cybersecurity frameworks and the regulatory standards fall short, is the prioritization of the controls into your enterprise.
yeah. I mean, I remember when Blueprint was kind of first explained to me, when you guys kind of accepted me into your group, and the way it was explained was so different than anything else because it takes into account the organization's priorities and their own objectives, and says, you don't have to follow this timeline from start to finish. It's able to be adjusted based on, whether you had an audit finding you need to address, or maybe, you guys are more concerned about endpoint security than you are traditional PAM up front. Like that is, you can definitely, shift those things. And that whole idea of it actually caring about and incorporating, my organization's needs into the equation that it's going to provide back, this adoption schedule and process, I think was really what stands it apart from everything else that exists out there today.
Yeah, so I that's a great segue into us. I'm fast forwarding through the deck already.
It's okay.
The whole point of the CyberArk blueprint is to help achieve faster security outcomes for our customers, right? With our risk-based guidance that's built on our experience. So if I go back, actually, let me go back one slide. So, we've been in this space for 20 plus years, 8,000 plus customers. We've done this so many times over and over again that we know which things, which access profiles, what level of privilege, which scenarios really make the biggest dent in like where the gotchas in, high effort scenarios are, that we try to take that information and like distill that back out to the community again, right? And it's
Right.
not just based on like, our implementation experience. It's from our red team's experience, our CyberArk threat research labs team's experience, their incident response and remediation experience. Is what tells us like what's the difference between the impact and the level of effort required. Because ultimately what we want the blueprint to be to our customers is a informative tool. It's a tool in the tool belt as you build your plan. So let me take you through this sort of like flow diagram really quickly, and I think that'll do a little bit better of a job at explaining what I'm talking about.
Cool.
So just like I did in that previous sort of table slide where I talked about like TTPs and the attack chain and stuff, when we talk about using the blueprint, that's also where we start. We start with understanding the attack chain so we can understand what controls are actually effective at mitigating risk, all the way from the workstation through interactive access to the downstream target systems themselves, right? Everywhere in between as it relates to identity, the life cycle of identity, the life cycle of access. What are the controls that make a dent? But then we say, okay, not everybody's in the same place today in terms of their maturity of controls across the organization. You need to figure out where you stand today, but you also need to figure out where do you stand in relation to those CyberArk best practices within the blueprint. So you can basically do like a measurement to say, okay, here are definitely where my security gaps are versus what CyberArk says is a high priority versus low priority, or high risk versus low risk kind of thing. But when the time comes to actually build your roadmap and build your plan, we don't want you to just follow everything step by step. To your point, Joe, we need organizations to take, what are their program drivers? What are their audit findings? What are their strategic security initiatives? Like, what are all the things that matter to you? But also then marry that with CyberArk's experience. Like, we want to be a strategic advisor to you and give you good security advice so you can make the most informed decisions possible. Right. So if I go to a different slide. So like when we talk about building an actionable plan, right? You have to know in order to truly make an informed decision about things that you might have never done before, you need somebody's input and perspective on what it means to do that thing. And that's essentially what the blueprint's trying to do. So if an organization said, hey, we really want to protect our Unix server admins and the root accounts within those Unix systems. Great. That's a fantastic use case to do. We would recommend you do that anyway. But if you haven't protected, say, your domain administrators or your cloud service provider administrators, you need to understand what's the trade-off between focusing on this thing over here versus potentially doing something that is higher risk, less effort, that's going to move the needle more. And what is that like residual security risk that's related if you didn't do this other thing over here? And you can still choose to go do the original thing that you wanted to do, like protecting your Unix admins and the root accounts for the local admins on your Unix Linux systems. But we couldn't in our good-hearted nature say, oh yeah, 100% you should do that without at least considering the trade-off between something super, super high risk versus something like high risk, right? So, and at the end of the day, if that's what an organization chooses to do, by all means, continue to do that, and we'll help you do that to the best of your ability. We want to make sure that our customers are making the most informed decisions, because why would you not want to have all of the knowledge at your disposal? Right.
So is this slide based off of something that's available to everyone to kind of work out their plan for their organization?
Yeah, so I'll stop sharing this for a minute, and this is probably a decent time to transition to the success blog. So
well, I think let me while you're pulling that up, I'm going to share
Yeah.
something real quick, and
Sure.
I'll get your thoughts on it. So I remember there is the Blueprint for Identity Security Success toolkit out there. And so they can go to cyberark.com/blueprint, get the toolkit. You got to fill out a little form like everything on cyberark.com, but what you'll end up getting is everything that you need to basically create an actionable plan like James had just mentioned. And you get a cool little video that you can watch that walks you through the toolkit and how to utilize it and how you can start to build your own. But James, I am interested in more information about what you were going to share. So I'm going to
So for those of you who haven't heard of this before, the CyberArk Success Blog was an area of the CyberArk technical community that I helped create maybe 2 years ago. And it was basically to fill a need about being able to disseminate practical, meaningful guidance for our customers, right? When you think about all things related to any cybersecurity tool or any technology tool for that matter, there's people guidance, there's process guidance, and there's technology guidance that's required to be successful. And this is essentially like the home of people and process and technology guidance. A ton of different articles created by different members of the customer success organization, the CyberArk security services organization, my team. There are other community contributions as well from some select members, like select partners, that we try to like, rather than necessarily having to have a webinar or a meeting or whatever every time we want to tell somebody something that we've said 100 times before, we're trying to create these materials to disseminate that information to the masses at scale, right? And so this particular article is one of the assets we have about describing like how do you create a roadmap with the blueprint, right? So it basically covers a lot of the stuff that I just talked about. It's a lot of text-oriented stuff, right? Because it's really trying to describe what the conversation that you'd be having with a human being in talking. Oh, I'm not sharing the right window anymore because it, let's do this. It's not sharing my entire thing. It's sharing one piece of it. Hang on. Sorry. Screen share again. I wonder if I can just share this whole window instead. Oh, there we go. Much better. Sorry. It's right here. Now you actually see what I'm talking about.
Hey.
I went from this slide to this tab, and then I wasn't presenting it right. So this article is basically walking through, what is a roadmap? Why does it matter? What are some of the challenges that come with building a roadmap? What are all the things that you need to be thinking about? Your internal priorities, what's driving your initiatives, that kind of stuff, right? And it also links you out to your point, Joe, before about the toolkit, right?
Nice.
It includes a link to it as well. So there's a lot of articles like that in here that describe like how to think about something, how to develop something. Let me find another good one.
I have, there was one on that you did with Jody Hunt and a couple other people regarding secrets that I send out to literally like everyone that I talk to.
That one's still pinned at the top. So let me pull that up real quick, and then I'll flip back to something else. Going too far back to Impact World Tour. Design recommendations for secrets management. So when you're thinking about embarking on the journey of managing machine identities at scale, right, and like really doing it wide across the enterprise, we wanted to provide customers with like almost everything that you would need to think about going into designing what that looks like, right? And so we talk about an introduction to the problem. We talk about why that design principles are different for machine identities versus human identities. What are different terminologies you need to be familiar with? What are different scaling methodologies that you can think about? How do you think about delegation and automation and access control principles, safe naming conventions?
So is this how all of these success blog posts are, like this in depth? I
Not
really
all of them. No. This is probably the most in depth.
Yeah, this is insane.
That we build, because this is like there are a couple that are like this that we label like a comprehensive guide, because they'll take you soup to nuts through everything, right?
What are these publicly available, or do I have to
totally publicly available?
Oh, I see. You're not even logged in. Perfect.
I'm not even logged into the technical community. Yeah, that was one thing that I was really adamant about when we built this system, was that there are so many folks within our customers, right, that are extended members of that like CyberArk family there, right? Like they're not the person who's got the hands on the keyboard doing something, but they most certainly need to know how something works or how to design something, or whatever the case may be. And so they're not necessarily going to have a login to the technical community. And so even like some of the next sort of segment around like the extended teams, like application developer or somebody in like the broader IT security organization, you want to share something with them, they're not going to have a login. And like it's a dumb and simple barrier to adoption that like we don't want to like have in place. So that's why all of this is none of this is gated, none of this is behind a login. And I was really adamant about that when we got this built out.
That's awesome. I was concerned about that as well, because this is great content. For it to be stuck behind a login portal would just be a complete miss.
Yeah, and a lot of this is really valuable, not just to like the individual who's trying to need it to build a plan or build a strategy or execute something, but also to not have to reinvent the wheel if you need to like write up a proposal or build a business case or make an argument. Like this, I think this is a really interesting one, for example, right? It's this article on understanding the identity attack chain. And I didn't get a chance to describe it before when I was going through the presentation, but I had talked about, attack chains being a really important part of understanding what's happening. And what this article does is walk through from CyberArk's perspective, like what are the main steps that relate to identity in the attack chain, right? It's credential theft and identity compromise and lateral and vertical movement and privilege escalation and abuse. And those are the three big areas that bad actors do things as it relates to identity to execute some sort of action on objective. And we want to be able to inform people what are the different controls that actually stop these things from happening? So there's this like extensive laundry list of different controls that you get as a part of your CyberArk services. And we talk through what does this thing do and why does it help mitigate this particular type of risk? And so we go through and talk about all of these different things, because when you're trying to make the argument to do some sort of like bottom up grassroots movement, right? You need to be able to explain to people why it's important that we do certain things and build that business case and build consensus. And you don't have to rewrite all of that from scratch. You could literally just go in here and copy and paste a bunch of this text and like re-swizzle it to build your argument, right?
Right.
Or likewise for doing that from a top-down approach, and you just want to educate people on why we're doing something this way. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. There must be close to like 100 articles at this point on a ton of different topics.
Yeah, you've been pumping them out like crazy, dude.
Yeah, not so much lately since I moved into my new role. I'm still trying to build a lot of stuff that will end up going on here, but we made a huge effort to do this. And there are some other folks at CyberArk who are now sort of driving this as well.
Cool.
But yeah,
is this part of like that digital success initiative that we have going on internally?
Yeah. So what you'll find is that within CyberArk, there's an entire team in the customer success organization that's responsible for like non-customer success manager assigned customers, right? And everybody needs good practical guidance in order to protect themselves. And so that team, or the sort of sub teams within there, use a lot of this material to develop the strategies to inform our customers that this information is available to you. And they do it in a very sort of like journey oriented way. So they'll take together things that are sort of introductory or early stage and package them together and sort of continue to do that as organizations evolve through their journey and pull the right things together that they need in order to sort of build their programs out. So what you'll find on here is like a wide variety of both highly strategic, but also incredibly technical, like in the weeds examples. So, at a strategy level, when we talk about why it's important to protect high-risk web applications and what the impact of that is and how to think about including that in a strategy long-term. But then we'll also have an article like this that actually talks about practically how do you go about implementing those types of controls like secure web sessions to whatever different types of high-risk applications that you might have, and outline what are some of those different types of high-risk applications that are worth protecting. And then what is the sort of like summary of the implementation steps that are required, and then calling back out to like the relevant places in the CyberArk documentation that tell you what to do. So like, we're not trying to rehash everything you find in the documentation.
Right.
We're trying to sort of supplement it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but this is an example of like an extremely granular sort of example of a walkthrough on something, whereas something that's more high level, for example, is the link that you see right here in front of you, building your end user communication and training strategy. So if I open up this article, this is something that has a lot more to do with operationalization, right? I talked about that as a concept of being really important for program strategy, is how are you actually going to like get this show on the road and get the wheels running and spinning and continue to run, right? Well, a big part of that is how you build out an end user communication and training strategy. So this article will take you through, how do we think about that? What is the difference between communication versus training? How do you understand the intended audience that you're building this material for? What are the types of enablement materials you should be thinking about building? All these sort of topics that are intended to help accelerate your ability to operationalize your program. So
this is cool. Actually, I've been asked quite a few times in the past, like the customer's not in a position to really pay for training, or the training is a little bit overkill for what they're trying to train their, the end users on. Uh, and this is perfect for to send, to them, to kind of give them how to begin, right? Like where to start, how to plan for this, what has been successful before. I think that's really the biggest part of all of this, is what has worked in the past and what could we potentially massage into our organization and make it work for us, right? Like
Yeah.
I wish that GitHub did this, because I am always going through, multiple projects trying to find something that works out for me, and a majority of them uh, just don't work. If I had uh, uh, a prescriptive guide for like how to utilize these things and stuff like that, I wouldn't have a problem at all. And it really helps to bring the conceived complexity of our solutions down to very simplistic terms that are now digestible, right? Because I think that if you go, I'm going to be completely upfront here, James. Like if you go out to, different review sites, the first thing you're going to see is everybody talking about how complex CyberArk is. But when you
Yeah, and
purchase when you purchase a large identity security platform, and you have all of these different, angles that you can attack a problem from, it is overwhelming to try and figure out, like, well, where do we begin? And I think that what you're providing is that clarity to take away that assumption of complexity and say, hey, look, we've done this a million times before. We've got the experience, and here it is all written down, what's worked for us in the past. What do you say to people who think that we're complex?
yeah, I mean, the space that for anyone who's ever said that like identity is simple, right, or like tried to argue that position, is certainly not a factual a factual statement. Like in and of itself, like there's a lot of identities that exist, there are a lot of environments that exist, there's lots of different enterprise resources that require protection. And so I would say like the space in which identity operates is complicated, right? Like how you protect workforce SaaS applications is different than how you protect long-lived systems like databases and servers and networking devices, right? And there's so much intricacies with different technologies that, yeah, things can be complicated.
Mhm.
But what we try to do is build out the right materials to like break down this problem in a really simple, straightforward, and meaningful way, right? So if we were to talk about the fact that like, if, let's say somebody had this super high level statement that said, I want to protect all the identities and all the privileges within my organization, right? That is a overwhelmingly large statement to make. How do you do that? Well, you'd want to start by like breaking up the first sort of like chunk of what that means. It's all right, who exists in my organization and what are the different enterprise resources that exist? And so this is where CyberArk's experience comes into play. This is how our solutions are aligned, and how we design things is to try and break these problems down into more meaningful bite-sized chunks, to be able to tackle this, right? And so
Right.
that's why, on this slide, I'll talk about the fact that there are lots of different identities that exist, but identities tend to have very similar access profiles amongst them, right? So IT is a very broad term for a type of user in an organization, right? It could be an application administrator, it could be traditional IT, third party, contractors that come in,
Mhm.
cloud operations, security operations. They're all different, but what is consistently similar amongst them is the access profile that they have, the types of things that they access, the ways in which we need to protect those things are all very, very similar. So we're immediately went from saying, okay, I want to protect everything to let me break it down into one persona to start, right?
Mhm.
That persona has a similar access profile to certain enterprise systems. I can start to build off of that and start to make, a chunk here and a chunk here and a chunk here,
Right.
right? So when we think about what does it mean to be in IT, it starts here on your workstation, right? Like an IT administrator, whatever sort of sub role they might be, has a workstation. What's on the workstation? browser password stores, session cookies, remote desktop connection manager tools, administrative rights, scripts they might use to make their life easier. And then if it's a Windows machine, it's got the LSAS process, right? Lots of other credentials embedded in there. So, all right, I've already started to say, okay, I know where identity and privilege and credentials and access lives already on my workstation. I've already started to narrow that scope down a little bit. And then you go to the right-hand side and you look at the types of things they have access to: security tools, ITDR services, vulnerability management services, CSPM services, right? Identity security tools themselves are just another high-risk SaaS application. Automation and CI/CD tools, right? How an IT administrator, whatever that flavor might be, right, accesses those things,
Right.
is going to be the same. It's, SAML authentication, single sign-on with, what most organizations are doing today is like a baseline of MFA. But we know from our experience in our labs team, in the threat research, right, and the breaches that occur in the wild, that's not enough, which is why you have this emphasis of also protecting the workstation and layering on these additional intelligent privilege controls to protect that. But now that is an access profile and a method that I can repeat over and over and over again for anything that fits that similar high-risk SaaS, profile. Great. I've simplified that, operating model for that thing already because I've sort of defined what that looks like. Same thing with accessing your cloud native services, right? With zero standing privilege, or Elastic Cloud workloads with zero standing privilege. I can build another access profile there. And with the same thing with long-lived systems applying, what a lot of organizations think of CyberArk as is that secure standing privilege access, right? Which is where we played for a really long time.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is we're taking the lessons that we've learned about protecting those long-lived systems and applying them to these other areas within the enterprise because we know that those things need them.
Right.
But if you sort of think of it like by, persona by persona, if I move to a developer persona, they might not have access to cybersecurity tools, but they still have access to automation and CI/CD tools. And they have access to like really important development tools. And so that same high-risk SaaS app, access profile that I built and the controls that I built to protect that, I just swap it out for the next sort of person in the next set of tools. And it's the same thing all over again.
I like how you put Postman under development tools, considering the heartbreak that we've undergone here internally at CyberArk. That's really hurting me a little bit.
I should have just changed that to something else.
I now fully understand why Postman is a high-risk SaaS-based development tool, right? I wish Postman was not SaaS at all. Why are you putting any of my data in the cloud, dude? I don't want my secrets there. I don't know what you're doing with them. So anyways.
So then you just continue to look at these different sort of access models that exist. What does the access model for the workforce look like? Sometimes it's high-risk SaaS applications, it's workforce apps, it's non-enterprise integrated apps that just use like freestanding credentials and self-hosted things too. And so when you think, and same thing with machines, right? The machine access profile as well. So it's really important to understand, going long-winded way of going back to the point you're making about, it being complicated. Yeah, sure, identity can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be, right? And when you work with the right vendors and you work with the right partners to help break it down into meaningful and consumable ways, I think is a real value of what CyberArk brings. So
yeah, I think the other aspect of this is the perspective of those people on this slide on the left-hand side. It's okay. It was basically your IT admins, your developers, and things like that, right? Specifically from a developer's point of view, the developer should not be concerned with, where their secrets are being stored, whether that is one particular product or another, or what is going on, right? All the developers should be concerned about is how are they going to access that secret in their application at the time that it's needed? What API endpoint am I hitting? How am I authenticating? Am I authenticating? Maybe attributes of my application are being used for authentication, and I don't need to worry about that. I at least need to know where I'm getting the secret from. And that's really all that the developers should care about: how that's being managed, how that's being audited, where it's being managed from, and who owns all of that aspect of things. Developer doesn't care. If the secret's coming into the application, when the application asks for the secret and everything is being told to the developer that it's being securely provided to them, The developer, like there's no complexity to this. I'm getting a secret in my application, right? Like that's it. Boom, job done. So, it's a lot of I like to call it re-engineering vision, because there's a lot of preconceived notions that people come in with, and then I think that once they start having these conversations with us and building a relationship with us and meeting more people who are involved in the grand scheme of things, it starts to simplify, right? Champions are created, and then
Yeah,
we
I mean,
start to thrive in these organizations going
this is the
forward.
exact reason that my team exists at CyberArk, right? Is to be able to have these type of meaningful strategic conversations with our customers at a high level to set that strategy and break things down into more easily consumable, ways to implement identity security across the organization for whatever their goals might be, right?
Absolutely. So
So,
hey, let's take a few. Let's go over some questions. We've been getting questions in the chat.
yep.
I've been sitting on them for quite a while because people have been so excited. It seems they've been asking since the beginning. But for everyone else out there on YouTube or on LinkedIn, feel free to start putting your questions into the live chat. The questions can be about absolutely anything. I happen to have James Creamer with me, who works in the CXO security strategy. He's an amazing dude who knows strategy and program development, and I'm just going to word salad where he is
I
an
work in
employee
strategy.
in strategy. But no, yeah. So please, LinkedIn, you have the comments pane that you can start to ask questions in. YouTube, there's a live chat. We've already gotten a couple. So one that's relevant to what we've been talking about here recently comes from Matthias out on LinkedIn. And he's asking regarding security for it's very long, so I'm going to kind of post it up here so that you can read it and we can get to the answer, but then I'm going to pull it down so that it's not taking up so much
Yep.
real estate. But I mean, you understand the question, basically asking about how those specific frameworks are implemented by us, and if we have any documentation or collateral regarding that. And then also kind of, what is the next iteration of that lateral movement attack chain slide that we're all, I know I love the animation and stuff. When I saw it, I think you built that slide. Didn't you animate that slide?
Yeah, it's mine.
Look at you. Look at you. All of my PowerPoint that I learned came from you, with the exception of animations. I have to credit Sam Bringas at Impact 2017. 20 minutes before my breakout session there taught me how to do animations, but you improved my eye for design and PowerPoint and how I can really do things. And that slide is just amazing to this day. But please, let us know.
Yeah. Let me hit present. I'm gonna pull up a slide real quick.
Okay.
And then I'll talk to it as well. As I just
Hopefully Matthias is still out there, buddy. We're going to get to you. If you have any additional questions or follow-up questions, feel free to drop them in the LinkedIn chat.
Window. All right, cool. So to answer the actual question, is there like a brochure or an infographic or something to help align different security controls from different frameworks to CyberArk security controls? There are a couple of things that are floating around on CyberArk.com, but what I can tell you is that we're actively going through and trying to build some refreshed material in order to do that. So I don't think there's like a good all-inclusive resource to share with you right now, but hopefully there'll be something that's coming soon. In the immediate short term, right, I can talk to you about this slide. So the thing that's like really common amongst all of these different frameworks and standards, right, is really boiled down to four things, like four big categories of things that align to things that CyberArk does. Like these aren't just things that CyberArk does, but like these are wholly relevant to the conversation. So first and foremost, well, I guess I should say they all have subtle variations in identity related topics, but these themes are pretty much universal across NIST 800-171 or CMMC or CIS, V8 security controls, right? They're all going to talk about these types of things. The first category is access management, right? Which is all about centrally managed access, ensuring that only authorized identities can access systems and data. And it's also about establishing the right processes to grant, revoke an identity's access at the time of hire or a role change, right? That's almost in every single one of those is saying you need to be able to do these things, of which CyberArk does all of these things. The next big one is about MFA, And it's about requiring more than one method of authentication to verify that user's identity in order to access sensitive information or systems of any kind. In some cases, it covers remote and local network access. And sometimes it'll define sort of who the access should, or who the MFA should be applied to. But MFA is another one that's pretty universal across, at a bare minimum, all traditional IT systems and privilege systems. But then in a lot of cases, it's also just applied to the workforce across the board. Again, controls that CyberArk can apply. The next category is around privilege controls. So this is really taken in a couple different directions. It's about limiting the user access rights to the absolute minimum that's necessary. It's about managing administrative privileges, both on workstations and infrastructure. It's about monitoring and controlling different types of privilege sessions, which applies to lots of different enterprise resources, not just traditional infrastructure. And it talks a lot about separation of duties. Again, all things that CyberArk can deliver. And the last, but certainly not least, is around auditing and accountability, which is all about the collection and retainment of log information for reporting and system activity, right? Being able to correlate audit, review, and analysis for a variety of different purposes, and then also being able to monitor for anomalous behavior. Now, not every single one of those frameworks and standards has every single one of these things in them in this exact language. But generally speaking, like, if this is the slide that you took a screenshot of and you used as like your guiding principles for the things that you want to align to, you're, probably 90% of the way there with what, with what these different frameworks and standards are telling you. So if I flip to this slide for a second, right, and you look at NIST,
I remember this one.
Yeah, CMMC and SOX. Like,
this is where we were showing this when the question came through. So
yeah,
very relevant.
Like, all of what I just talked about is more or less what they're telling you to do as it relates to identity, right? As it relates to identity. They're going to tell you to do a whole lot more other things that fall outside the scope of identity, right? Into those other buckets that we talked about here, right, in broader information security program management. But as it relates just to identity, that summary that I just described, I think, is what you'll most likely find is relevant. And as I mentioned as well, we're working on building some new, public-facing materials to help make that more digestible and also more directly aligned to certain standards. So if you are truly a NIST shop, or need to comply with CMMC, or whatever the case is, hopefully there'll be some new stuff coming for that too.
So Matthias, just to give you so that was a lot of great content.
I didn't
from
cover
James.
The second part of his question.
No, we'll get to it, but I'm going to wrap up the first part, and then we'll touch on the lateral movement side of things. But I just wanted to show him that out on CyberArk.com, if you go to the solutions section up here in the top nav, and then go over to government, it'll bring you to our government page. And then if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to see how regulations and compliance standards align with CyberArk from across the globe. So even if you're not American and need to follow US regulatory standards, there is for UK, Australia, EU, right? DOD, FedRAMP stuff. ISO 27. Isn't there 2 zeros in there? No, that's a different one.
This is a different one.
Yeah. All right. So anyways, you can go and you can learn more about all of these, or you can get the white paper at the top that kind of goes over them at a very high level. So whatever type of collateral you're looking for, you've got it there. So let's answer the second question for him. And
so the second part of Matthias's question was around many references to lateral movement, but he thinks that CyberArk is more than that. Oh, there's actually second question. Thanks for the answer.
So
I find sometimes a lot of
this came in reply to the first answer that you provided. So
so let me actually wrap up the last comment in relate. No, pull that back up again.
Okay.
We're talking about the last sentence in that comment. So in this scenario, I find it difficult explaining what CyberArk brings to the table versus standard MFA access management. And that's a great question. What CyberArk brings to the table versus sort of like commoditized MFA and access management is this perspective of intelligent privilege controls being married into everything that we do. right? And so, basic MFA is basic MFA, but there's another layer to MFA that you can think about in terms of it being adaptive and secure and being the highest level of, AAL compliance, right? And how does MFA feed into other processes like ITDR and being able to respond to different threats that come up, right? So there's a lot of like little subtleties about how we view the world in intelligent privilege controls being applied to what you might see as like commoditized, SSO and MFA that I think I'm probably not doing justice in this session. But I think it's certainly worth having a conversation if you want to talk about it further offline. So I'll probably end that part there because I do want to go back to the second part of the first question or the first statement which was in reference to a lot of references to lateral movement, right? But CyberArk is more than that, and lateral movement is not as important to companies without domain-joined computers. I'd actually challenge the second part of that statement, that lateral movement is not important to companies without domain-joined computers. Lateral movement exists in all different forms of technology, not just things that are domain-bound. So when you think about like various Linux systems, right? Sure, you might use AD bridging in order to access Linux systems, in which case, yes, it is domain bound and it's completely susceptible to lateral movement. But even if you just use the concept of SSH keys throughout the organization, lateral movement is very easy on Linux and Unix systems because the whole concept of an SSH key is a one-to-many relationship, the same way that a domain account is a one-to-many relationship. So it still certainly exists there. And within the cloud service providers, you're right. If you access, AWS account ID or an AWS organization, or Azure subscription or Google Cloud projects, right? They are in fact very hierarchical in nature. So if you compromise access to one of those systems, there's so many things that you can potentially move left and right in access or move up within there. So even if it's not typical domain Active Directory, that concept of federation and directory services exists throughout so many different technologies that it's really hard to find a system that isn't truly susceptible to lateral movement. So I would challenge that statement a little bit, but I think it's really important to understand how those things happen, because that if you want to stop attackers from being able to compromise those things, you have to know all those different avenues that lateral movement can occur in. And it's not just traditional domain joined systems that are susceptible to that too.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think that you covered the answer to that question well. I don't think you left any stone unturned there. We do have other questions to go to. The next couple are going to be lumped together, so it's going to come across in like multiple. So we're looking at, let's see, we got 3 questions on this first one. We'll start with the best recommended approach to give a customer about CyberArk in terms of on-premise and cloud. Is that something that you feel comfortable?
Yeah. So I'll take it from a couple different examples, assuming that I understand the direction the question is being asked. So if the question is in relation to protecting on-premises and cloud assets, right, then the CyberArk blueprint is going to provide you with really great starting place, right, in of the direction of where we think you should be protecting. And it honestly should start with probably a combination of both, right? There are extremely critical risk assets that exist in the cloud, or certain critical identities that exist in the cloud. So your cloud service provider administrators, this could be your IT operations, this could be your cloud operations, or SRE type roles, right, that have administrative access to the highest level of your cloud service providers, in which case incredibly risky and certainly worth protecting up front. But also of equal critical risk is protecting, say, your domain administrators and your domain controllers that are often still hosted on premises or self-hosted, right? So both of those are incredibly risky and critical sort of use cases to protect. One is traditionally on-prem, one is obviously in the cloud. And so if not doing them simultaneously, doing them shortly one after the other is certainly worthwhile to do. And so as far as like a roadmap for a newbie, I would just lead you to the CyberArk blueprint in
Yeah,
the blueprint
that's what I was going
toolkit
to
that's
say.
going to walk you through a ton of that stuff. Now, in terms of best practice implementation and challenges, there's a lot of like people related challenges that we'll talk about that you'll find material on the success blog for. So there's a whole series of articles about roles, responsibilities, and staffing, organizational change management, training and education for your end users and stuff that I think is super relevant. But in terms of like general best practices, like that term is so high level that are we talking about architectural best practices? Are we talking about strategy best practices? Are we talking about best practices for a very, very specific use case, right? So I don't know if I can quite answer that question that well, but I would sort of defer you to the success blog as a starting place to browse around and look through the material to see if we have what it is that you're potentially asking for.
I'll even I'll even take this opportunity to expand upon the first question regarding on-premise and cloud and the best recommended approach for a customer. I think that it's very important to kind of think about, right, what CyberArk needs to deal with when releasing a particular solution for a customer's environment that they own and manage, or an environment that CyberArk owns and manages themselves, right? From an infrastructure perspective. When we're developing self-hosted software that's going to be hosted by the customer in their own environment and managed in their own environment on their own infrastructure, we have to plan for many, many, many variables that could occur in that particular customer's environment. No one customer is going to have the same environment. So we need to plan for all of these variables. This makes it very hard to make predictions as to how we expect our software to act in these certain scenarios. We can definitely test and QA for the most common scenarios, but there's always going to be these unique facets to each individual customer's environment. From a SaaS perspective, because we own and we manage the infrastructure, that allows us to understand the static nature of the performance, of the latency, of the communication that's going to occur across all of the services that we're providing. And because of that, and because we own the infrastructure, and because we can make all of these services talk in the back end to each other, because everything is set up the way that we need it to be, this allows us to create the identity security platform that everyone is using today, and to create the identity security shared services that exists in the back end that allows Privilege Cloud to communicate to Conjure Cloud, to communicate to Secrets Hub, to communicate to Dynamic Privileged Access and Secure Cloud Access, and all of these solutions that make up the entire platform that is SaaS-based in our identity security platform. And so with that, right, alone, it becomes a question of, do you want to manage your own infrastructure and to have all of everything hosted in your own way, and you can have that sort of experience and the assurances that anything that happens is completely your organization's responsibility, and you don't need to rely on a shared responsibility model like with a SaaS-based vendor? Or if you would like to utilize all of the latest and greatest features that are being implemented into the identity security platform in a SaaS-based manner, because CyberArk owns that infrastructure, we can release a lot quicker, we can test for one situation, and we can make things happen and talk to each other in a more cohesive process. That's really where you have to weigh whether it's something that you've got regulatory standards, like you're a financial institution and it's hard to go into the cloud with some of this stuff, or you are okay with being SaaS, right? There's no regulatory things like FedRAMP or other compliance standards that need to be in place before you can make that move. So Those are other aspects of what CyberArk provides to think about as you're speaking to your customers. If you're a partner, or I don't know who you are, but assuming you're a partner and trying to talk to customers about the best approach for them, these are also the technical aspects of things. I think James does a great job of covering the business side of it and the people person, the people process side of it. But then from the technical aspect too, there's benefits gained by going SaaS just because we can do a lot more in that one environment we know is always going to be good for everything that we provided. So that was a lot of information, but it's not something that I've been able to kind of explain to people on a venue like this. It's something that I'll have the conversation with individual customers, but I think that it really contrasts the difference between the self-hosted solutions that we provide and the identity security platform that's SaaS-based that we provide as well. Obviously, I love our SaaS offerings. I use them daily myself for a lot of things. So I'm a huge proponent of that. It took me a little bit coming from the financial industry to really wrap my head around the idea of SaaS and the security that comes with that. But being an employee of CyberArk and being able to, lift the veil and see what's going on in the back end, I put my 100% trust in what we're completing here and providing to everyone. So with that, we'll move on. He's actually got two other questions here, number 4 and number 5. We can both talk about these. I think we both have experience with these particular questions. Interested in the most faced challenges in a live environment in any role in the CyberArk team, and then also activities or hard issues that are faced and resolved on the implementation side, operation, as well as the development side.
Yeah, I think I can take this one because I saw another question that I think might also be somewhat related. From
Was
Raul
it this one?
Well, no, it's from Raul. About challenges of implementation.
Shoot. Oh, okay. I didn't see those come in. Yeah, those are at the bottom.
Couple extra ones from YouTube. So I think generally speaking, like you could run into a wide variety of different like technical challenges that relate to networking configurations and architecture and not having the right firewall rules open and like really like nitpicky situational stuff like that like could be common, could be uncommon. It's like very, very much depends on that organization and how well have they, done the prerequisite work to understand the ports and protocols and architecture and stuff like that. But like that is like very easily solvable things. Just open up the right rule, whatever. What I think is arguably more important to understand and can be a challenge for organizations is like the organizational change management that comes with implementing a change in a process, right? So this is kind of like completely non-technical. This is all about how you educate the user base that you're rolling out new controls to. So anytime anybody's asked to do anything differently than what they are used to doing, the immediate response is, I don't want to do that. I would just want to keep doing the same thing that I was doing before, right? And so what we need to do and think about going into a lot of and this is not just like CyberArk related, right? This could be any cybersecurity product. This could be any like IT initiative for that matter, is going into it with this mindset of organizational change management. And so I'm going to share my screen because we have an article that talks about this as well. Let me find it. It's an article called Change is Hard. Best practices for organizational change management. And what this does is talk about this concept of what is organizational change management. It's basically focused on people and process management to overcome like pushback and change related pushback in a way that like allows you to implement changes to processes without it feeling overburdensome for the user community that you're applying them to. And so I think this is a cornerstone of the customers who are most successful with any of their identity security initiatives are the ones that master the ability to do organizational change management. The product from the product perspective and the service perspective, we want to make the CyberArk services as easy of a user experience as possible for people to do things, and hopefully minimize the amount of change that's required. But at the same time, like, it doesn't matter if you didn't change your experience at all. If you say that you're going to change something or we're doing something new, there's still this tendency to push back. So I would highly encourage you guys to take a look at this article on organizational change management. And we talk about different major sort of practices that are involved in doing that, having top-down consistent messaging, doing user enablement, gamification, empowerment operation, balancing sort of security and user experience. I think these are really important things to be mindful of, and are honestly like probably the biggest roadblock for a lot of organizations as they stumble upon, as they like didn't think about what was the sort of user rollout change process going to look like as they go to deploy a new technology or control. So
awesome. Yeah, Raul actually agrees with you, so that's always good.
And that definitely applies to traditional industries, manufacturing industries, to like dovetail on the second part of Raul's question about manufacturing industries. I mean, the other part here that most manufacturing organizations need to worry about are all these random plants that they have that actually do the practical manufacturing. So there's like an operational technology standpoint to think about. But honestly, that's got a lot more to do with just like, how do we build the networking and access rules that allow us to go manage, a plant in the middle of, the country or whatever, right? That is like way far away from, where traditional IT and security and operations and stuff might be. So
I've talked to a lot of these manufacturing organizations and stuff out at conferences, and a lot of times when they approach me at the conferences, they have different machines that run off of like Raspberry Pis and stuff like that. It seems like IoT, right, running a lot of these manufacturing facilities is becoming more and more common. So maybe it's just, one of the challenges of implementation of CyberArk is maybe discovering and dealing with all of the IoT devices that need to be managed, that could potentially have privileged accounts that they need to be able to, have these different manufacturing equipment function.
Yeah, I think from like a strategy perspective, this is a really interesting one, because not all organizations that do manufacturing have the same like security leadership structure between IT and OT, right? And so in some cases they roll up to be the same person at the top of the pyramid, right? And so that they can help set that strategy. But in some cases it's like totally unrelated to IT, and it sits, under like the COO or something, right? Versus like the CIO. And so there can be challenges with, just organizationally aligning the right strategic stakeholders together to convince them that this is the right thing to do. This is how we want to think about doing it, those kind of things. But, from a technical perspective, you're talking about like the discovery of IoT devices, of which we have a lot of different integrations with, different IoT vendors to help discover those things, right? And then obviously manage them as well. And so our common approach to IoT and OT is like interfacing with like a management plane or a control plane that does a better job in being, more like industry related in IoT and OT.
Right? Are you connected to our live chat right now for YouTube?
I see it. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, are you logged into YouTube to where you can reply to
the
chat?
No, I just see it in the
you want to share with me on Teams the link to this post? Raul is asking for
yeah.
the link. I can post it up into YouTube for him to get a direct link to.
Show, my buddy, for show.
Thank you. So we'll get that to you in a sec, Rahul. We definitely appreciate the question. There is another one from him that is basically asking, is there CyberArk SaaS available for learning purposes? And I think I can kind of field this question. If you go out to cyberark.com, you'll be able to go to our demos and trials section. And then from there, you can click on the start a trial button. And there are some free trials and demos here for certain products. Definitely not all of the services that we offer in our identity security platform. But for vendor PAM, workforce identity, workforce password management, which is really cool. secure web sessions, and then one that is not here. Oh, the CyberArk Blueprint Toolkit is out here, buddy. Look at that. I didn't know that we also placed it here under demos and trials, so it gets a little bit more visibility. Well, there you go. What is this rapid risk assessment? Is this something that you did as well?
No, I think that, no, I'm not familiar with that part. That might be.
There is one that there's a trial that we are currently having internal talks about now for another service that's provided, but I don't think that we're in a position to be talking about it yet. So definitely keep coming back to this free trial and demo section and checking on new things. Good times to find new services is around impact time, which is May 20th through the 22nd this year. So I'm sure if you come back around that time frame and you take another look here, you might see a couple extra services with some free trials ready to get started. So just a couple different resources out there for you. We also provide official training, of course, for all of our CyberArk services, including our SaaS-based services. So you can always get to those by going to services and support and clicking on training here. And that will be able to take you over to our training portal where you can start to filter and sign up for those different things here. Now, there are prices associated with it, but depending on whether you have a success plan or not as a current customer, you can typically spend points on these as well to alleviate that cost.
And I think this transitions really nicely into a question that Andy put in the chat.
Okay.
Andy Harris.
Let's bring that one up.
I'm going to pull that up. Apologies, I'm joining late. Yeah. How would you approach skills building as tech stacks change and CyberArk products change, right? Part of the obvious answer that Joe talked about is like the CyberArk University training. But I think that there's, you don't have to keep showing that. But I think the other part of that is just like trying to stay up in the industry about what's going on and different places you can go and do that. So for starters, I think anyone who has access to like LinkedIn Learning is a fantastic place to build generic sort of enterprise resource related skills in the tech stack. So as I hear Andy say tech stack, my mind goes to that image that I showed earlier about different types of enterprise resources, web applications and long-lived systems and cloud native services and those kind of things. And sites like LinkedIn Learning are going to have a lot of awesome information on there. YouTube as well. Like you can find so much awesome tech information on YouTube. You've got lots of official and unofficial channels in terms of like CyberArk product information. So obviously the sessions that Joe leads, like these types of things in and amongst themselves, aside from me, because I'm talking about strategy, they're often like highly technical in nature. There are lots of product overview videos and demos that are available on cyberark.com. And then any of the webinars that we run. So if you go to cyberark.com/events and you just like attend those things, you don't necessarily have to attend every single one and pay attention to everything that's happening all the time. Like put it up in the background, like it's a podcast or something. Right. And then just like when you hear something that sparks your interest, go flip over to it and go watch what's happening. Right. I think those are great ways to stay up to date and up to speed on what's happening in the industry, not just within CyberArk, but like in, the tech industry as a whole. Those would be some things that I recommend. And if you have the ability to get out to like the different events that we're doing. So the big one that you'll see us talk about a lot is CyberArk Impact. There's two different ways that we do CyberArk Impact. There is CyberArk Impact World Tour, where we go across major cities across the world and we host a lot of these different sessions. Joe, if you want, I don't know if you still have that tab open somewhere.
For what?
DC World Tour event.
Oh yeah. Let me pull that back up again. Right here. Boom.
So Impact World Tour is like a smaller sort of compact version of CyberArk Impact, where we go around and talk about lots of really important conversations as it relates to the industry and to obviously CyberArk itself. And so if you zoom in a little bit more, like some examples of what you might talk about. So in this particular DC one, right, there's a lot, like Washington, DC is highly governmental, highly federal defense contractor oriented. So that entire session is really oriented around like the DoD and the government and Fed and contractors and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff that you'll see us talk about that relates to that for this particular one. But having conversations around how do we practically secure the public cloud? How do you, protect yourself against the types of major breaches that have been happening recently, like all sorts of different topics that I think are really relevant. You'll find at these sort of localized versions of CyberArk Impact, whereas at the main CyberArk Impact, it's like all out these types of topics and more, right? Hands-on training, being able to access and actually talk to people in person, like grab a drink, grab some snacks with somebody and just have a conversation about something, I think is like the real value of coming. It's like that. I'll say like that. I should say the real value, the hidden value in coming to these events is like actually being able to like shake somebody's hand and have a conversation about something that's relevant and resonating to you. So
we're all on booths. We're all showing something. And I honestly, like, you don't even need to look at what I'm showing you, but come have a conversation. Let's talk. I'll talk about anything. It doesn't need to be what's in front of me. I'm a talker, but that's just me, right? Like,
there are.
So that I absolutely love these, these events, especially Impact, because I know everyone there is interested in CyberArk, right? When I go to other events for other vendors and stuff, it's kind of hit or miss, who's interested in what, but at least at Impact, I know that every conversation I'm going to have is going to be relevant to, what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so, always love being able to drop knowledge on people. You did mention, you mentioned listening to it like a podcast, and I do want to remind everyone that CyberArk does have a podcast out there called Trust Issues. It is on episode 48, and I can't believe that it's on that. There's a guest every show, similar to kind of how I do it here. It's audio format. I don't know if do you know if there's video?
I don't think there's video. No, I think it's audio only.
I don't think so either, but it's been covering a lot of interesting topics lately, getting some cool guests on. But definitely worth browsing through and looking for what's relevant to you and listening to that episode. So there's 48 to choose from right now, with more coming out. I don't know what the cadence is. Looks like twice a month. March 5th and March
usually a couple of months. And
it looks like that.
The guest speakers you'll find on the Trust Issues podcast vary wildly from like experts inside CyberArk that are in, like some really interesting roles where they're trying to give you their perspective on things that we see. Like I'll go and talk to, 150 customers a year. That's 150 conversations that I can have and just, grab interesting insights and then provide that back out, right? Is one type of sort of persona that you might get. But then you also get like these customers and these folks who work in different industries or these different experts. They're giving you a completely different perspective on something. Like if you go all the way to the top.
Yeah, I'm trying to find you.
Oh, I'm not on here yet.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, it's just Len and Andy a lot.
Yeah. And you see, like there's an episode on OT, right?
Yeah,
like,
right here.
There's an episode on OT right there. There's an episode on automotive security there. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, there's also automotive security. Yeah, so so then we're bringing in people from the industry to talk about the specific problems and challenges that they're facing. I'd imagine. Yep. I haven't listened to the recent ones. I should probably go back and listen to that. This cyber hygiene one looks pretty interesting to me as well. Yeah, so pretty cool. Go out there, browse it, take a look, listen to it. It's on everywhere that you would imagine it would be, so that you can listen to Trust Issues. It's a CyberArk official podcast. So I think the next one should be coming out here soon. It looks like this one was from the 21st. So probably like first week of April, I'd imagine. The next one will be dropping. So pretty cool. It's out there. You can get to it. I got to it through company
cyberark.com/podcasts.
Oh, well, yes. You could also just type out podcasts after cyberark.com, I guess, or you could be slow like me and go clicky. Awesome. James, let's see. What other questions do we have here? I think we covered most of the questions that were asked. I think that your initial presentation of just everything really sealed the deal for people. And they were like, I don't have a lot of questions myself. So regardless, man, we did it. I think you were worried that we were just going to last an hour and nobody would have any questions. And then we'd kind of like, what are we going to do for an hour? But look, 2 hours later, here we are. We're wrapping things up, man.
Yeah. And like I had prepared a ton of stuff that I was hoping I'd be able to talk about. And then very quickly realized that like we're going to fly through time. I highly encourage you to check out the identity security clinic that's happening tomorrow that I'm presenting with a peer on my team, David Higgins. Joe, you should definitely leave the link to this in the chat as well. Sure. Because I think you'll get a ton of value out of this as well as it relates back to strategy again, right? This is like another sort of strategy oriented conversation rather than necessarily like, you know, focusing on a specific cybersecurity control or a specific CyberArk service. This is like, hey, let's look at how we break this problem down, how we come up with a solution to the problem. How do we fix it? How do we prevent it from happening again? And doing that from a very sort of pragmatic and practical sense. Very, very excited about that tomorrow. I think that if you were hoping to get a little bit more out of that in this session today, that you'll definitely get some really good stuff out of the clinic tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, we're getting thanks from India. So we had somebody stay on late for us to watch from India. So definitely appreciate that. We'll be wrapping this up, but it will be available on YouTube. And I think LinkedIn will still keep it. Like there's a LinkedIn event page for this. So I would hope it would provide it on demand, but at the very least, YouTube will have this on demand. If you're watching this on demand and you have any questions that you want to provide to either James or I, feel free to place it in the comments. We're going to get notified that you're putting comments on this video, and we'll be more than happy to answer them once those are posted in the comments. And so other than that, hopefully everybody is coming to CyberArk Impact. As we spoke about earlier in the show, James Creamer will be there. You'll have your opportunity to ask him all of your pointed questions at CyberArk Impact. James, thank you, dude, so much for coming on today. I'm hoping that I can have you on the next Ask Joe Anything that I do. Maybe it'll be remote. We'll see. But I definitely want to have you back so that we can finish having the conversation around everything that you didn't get a chance to get to today. So
yeah, man.
We'll talk about that offline. We'll figure out a date and time for you in the future, sometime later this year, and we'll get you back in if you will be back for us. So hopefully you had fun, and I appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Thank you all to everyone who joined, and for those of you who are watching this on demand and on record, feel free to leave your questions. I'd be happy to follow up with whatever you have. So appreciate your time.
Well, that's it, everybody. As always, come back next month for another Ask Joe Anything. Hopefully we'll be talking about endpoint security. So get your questions prepared now. And until then, stay secure.